Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Magnanimous Collective. I'm your host, Sean Kubota. Let's start it off with a deep breath into our bellies. And let it go. Oh yeah, dropped in. Today I have a very special guest. A man of so much talent and so much poise, so much care in his heart that he shows on his sleeve. You just see it from him. You see it in his gaze. You see it how he walks and how he carries himself. He is a psychotherapist, a depth life coach. He's also a Kundalini yoga practitioner who is blending the ways of Kundalini with Sufi mysticism. And he's just an amazing man. He's someone that I admire and how he walks and how he shows up and how he talks and just how he shares his heart. So without further ado, thank you so much for coming on. Yaya Gorbani, my guy. Appreciate you.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for giving me the privilege of being here.
Bro, I'm honored, man. And we've been diving in just on off camera, and there's so much to talk about, and there's so much there. And yet, you know, one of the topics of this podcast is obviously rising above challenge, you know, triumph over challenge and adversity. And what I find really interesting about your story and what we just started talking about a little bit is how you've been multicultural and how you've grown up and how there's different aspects of yourself that have come from your culture as well as you being an American. Like I asked, are you born and raised here? You're like, yes and no. So tell us a little bit about that and what challenges you've had to face, how you've gained and cultivated this awareness and this presence that I'm sitting in front of right now.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity of being all around the world, both Iran and America, which it's such a crazy paradox. You know, the number one enemies, and to kind of be from both sides and is an interesting experience, and to love both sides is an interesting experience. But that's been the gift that's been given to me, and for a long time it didn't feel like that because it feels so contradictory and they're so different.
Yeah.
But I was born here. I lived in Iran for a while. My parents surprised me by taking me there to just announce that they're getting separated.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Which was funny. Like they take us to Disneyland and they take us to California. And then all of a sudden we go to Iran. It's like, all right, now we're getting separated. It's like what I compare it to is, you know, in Islam, before you kill a sheep, you give it water and then you just pet it and then you kill it.
Shit, man.
So, but it was good to be around family. It was good to learn the beautiful language of Farsi.
Yeah.
Some say the oldest culture in the world. And so to experience that type of living and fall in love with a whole other way of being was the experience of Iran. Then we came back, and I'm here today, and I've been here for a few decades now.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that. And, you know, one of the things I had stated, you know, in regards to Persia and Iran, you were saying that there's something there. Many of us don't know. And, you know, me growing up in Westwood, you know, little Persia town, and growing up with a lot of Persians myself, and then also finding myself meeting a lot of Iranian people and finding out the differences, but also like not really fully understanding. And you having that specific, you know, that specific touch point. Tell us a little bit about that and how you perceive that.
Get more specific with me. You know, I'm not gonna do your work for you.
Well, I'm trying not to call you
controversial. Ask me controversial questions.
I'm trying not to call you Prince of Persia because you told me not to, even though that is what you are. And you know, you had talked about how Persia, it can be connotated with being a word that, you know, is seen in a different light and so forth, as opposed to being Iranian. Because I was asking about the difference.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good topic, and it's that. I guess being a Persian is not really a thing anymore, unless you speak in poetic ways and you know you want to honor tradition. But Iran is the country. However, for a lot of Iranians, that comes with feelings of shame at times because of the way the government is ran in Iran. You know, and a lot of people don't want to be associated with that word, so they become they take on the word Persian and introduce themselves as Persian. So to me, I mean, I guess both works.
Yeah.
But where are we using it from? Are we using it from a place of hiding, or are we using it from a place of just honoring? And I think only you will know. So, I think both applies.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Does that answer the question?
100%. It's just something fascinating to me as someone who's on the outskirts, who doesn't really know and isn't entrenched in that culture besides living amongst it. Like I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So that gives me a little bit of an insight because, like that exists throughout many of our cultures, many ethnicities, many ethnic backgrounds. There's all sorts of, there's a lot of trauma in all spaces. There's a lot of things that we're working through and so forth. And so I just appreciate that little bit of insight because I think that that's something that not a lot of us even know about, to be honest. It might be so normalized for you, but for me, I'm just like hearing it for the first time. Cool. Well, thank you for that. That being said, yeah, man. That being said, like I said, one of the topics that's prevalent in here is talking about how in every moment we have a choice. We have a choice to respond to our reality, and through our response to our reality, also dictate how we choose to perceive it. And from that through that personal agency, we're able to literally create a trajectory, either towards, a reality we desire, or towards a misery story and perpetual victimhood and so forth. And so what I'm curious about, from your space of being a therapist and doing this work that you do, like, is there anything that you have to speak on that topic that might also potentially elaborate on it, or maybe even challenge me in my viewpoint as well in regards to that topic?
Well, what is your viewpoint?
Well, specifically, thank you for that. I have friends who are therapists, right? And they come from the space that, psychologists. And they come from somewhat of this space of the savior, right? Where it's like, well, these people didn't have this, and these people didn't have that, and therefore X equals Z. And this is why they don't have the aptitude or the ability in order to choose. And I'm saying, hey, I can have compassion for someone, and yet I feel like it's blasphemy and dishonoring their divinity for me to ever agree. I will never agree with the fact that they don't have a choice. Will I say that they'll ever choose the choice? No, because they're that powerful and that sovereign, and that choice is always available, but that doesn't mean they'll choose it. But to try to sympathize or pity someone because of the choices they make, I feel like does not instill the appropriate boundary in a form of love that is a communication and an intelligence in itself, as well as also encourage them in their own empowerment to actually choose to be the creator they are. Instead, it's more of like a narrative and a specific mindset that's limiting. So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the distinguishment that you're making. If you look at being a victim as an archetype, then all of a sudden you're going to step outside of it being such a black or white thing. Are we going to baby somebody or do not be a victim? It's such a black and white thing. And I think it's a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about an archetype, any archetype that is, we're talking about a journey. And we're talking about it being neutral. There is no positive, negative. It's just a spectrum of things. And being a victim, in some sense, is a journey. And we all come into this existence, in some sense, feeling powerless or being powerless. Yeah. And we're on the journey of rising. So in that sense, I think it's necessary for us to experience versions of victimhood until we rise. So if somebody's coming to my office and they are very deeply in pain, a part of the experience and what my job is for them to actually cry that out, to speak about how much of a victim they feel. Yeah. And you got to sit with that. There is parts of us that need to feel something. And sometimes the only way you can access that is through giving yourself the permission of being a victim. Agreed. Right? Yeah. And a lot of times as men, we try to bypass that and we're like, no, we're not a victim. And they come home and they treat their child like shit. And the interesting thing about the bully and a victim is they are counterparts. It's literally the same thing in many ways. So I think sometimes, in order for feelings to be felt, we must experience the pain of being a victim. So it is an immature stage, I believe, but ultimately it hopefully puts you on the path. Now, there is such a thing as repeating the story too much until you get paralyzed by it, and we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think the journey of life is about discovering that we are the engine of co-creation, right? So, and that everything in life, every experience is nothing but energy that's here to help us make a choice that hopefully allows us to co-create.
That's a great way of putting it. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there more?
There's always going to be more.
Cool. Well, I love that. The choice, for one. The choice to co-create. And that choice is always there. The opportunity is always there, right? And yet, the interesting thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're talking about with being able to feel into the victim, I feel like there's a big difference when it comes to being a victim of circumstance, which is just bound to happen and is inevitable, and choosing to perceive your reality as you being the victim of the situation that is needing and or deserving of sympathy, pity in a vampiric type of way, as well as just like becoming a black hole and or using it as a crutch in order to not show up to your worth and responsibility as a child of creator, as this part, as you said, this vehicle of co-creation. So which one are you talking about? Are you talking about both? Because I feel like those two are different. Like being a victim of circumstance, sometimes we have to tap into that to feel and be like, wow, this traumatic thing really did happen to me, in order to then choose not to be that victim. But then that victim archetype, or whatever we want to call it, narrative, that ends up proliferating into essentially that type of sickness that I feel like is perpetuated throughout society at this point. That's like, this is really the pandemic that I feel is the biggest pandemic, which is that glamorized, emotionally irregulated, individual who is vampiric in like, oh, this happened to me, so doesn't everyone feel bad for me? Oh, this is why I can't show up to my responsibilities. This is why I'm powerless. And then everyone's in this groupthink ends up reaffirming that. And then we have a whole bunch of people forgetting they're God's children.
Yeah. I think what you're speaking to is, and I may overassume here, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
Cool.
But
Thank you.
you may be speaking about the dangers of certain ideologies and philosophies, probably postmodern type of philosophies.
Definitely.
That put you in a group, and they teach you as a group what you need to feel, and this is what you must experience life as, which is a victim to a certain circumstance and to bring down power because you don't have power. And I think you're right. To teach that as an ideology can have its definite shadows. But I want to emphasize that it's not a one size fit all.
Right.
So sometimes that postmodern approach for some can be very important, but to teach it as an umbrella, right, and as a blanket type of way, well, then that becomes more than just honoring someone on an individual level. And postmodernism sometimes has the problem of not focusing on a person as an individual, but so much of putting him under a group. Right. So again, I'm going to answer back to your thing that it's not black and white. And there sometimes postmodernism can be the most beautiful thing. And this doesn't get talked about in the what is it, the manosphere or the Peterson type of places of the internet. It's just like postmodernism, horrible. And I'm here to say, no, postmodernism has a lot of beauty, right? Yeah. And then modernism has a lot of beauty. Yeah. Well, art, yes, but to go deeper into that, it's truly honoring of a subjective experience. It's the message with postmodernism is that you get to your truth essentially is honored more than anybody else's truth. However, there is something as an objective truth as well. So love to me is an objective thing. God is an objective thing. Oneness is an objective thing. So at what point do we kind of go a little crazy with this whole idea of everything is subjective? And that's been my journey. What is the fine line of bringing postmodernism into my work, but also having honoring the depth psychology world and bringing it together. So I don't want to get too abstract here. But the point is that I believe some people should be able to express themselves and even stick to a narrative of a victim in a certain stage of their process. However, as an analyst or a therapist, you want to be on the lookout for that. And as a therapist, you feel something in your body all of a sudden when you see a person is too married to a certain narrative.
Right.
And that's when you're going to start doing something about it. Hopefully, when you start noticing that, you can invite more curiosity into the room. And you're going to see if the person has the ability to look at themselves as someone who's exhausted the topic. And you're constantly moving this ball in session, essentially, for the client to look at it from a different point of view.
Yeah.
And if they're not able to do that, that's when you know someone's stuck. And that's where we get to your point that it could be a horrible teaching. I felt like we went to a lot of different places. So
no, I'm enjoying it.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, no, I'm loving this because because of your profession and also because of how you hold yourself, I'm actually really excited to talk about these topics because, for one, I think that what we're missing today in today's society is the ability to have discourse and to be able to talk about things and to be able to work things out. We have a lot of, and let me just start by saying this, what you're saying in regards to it being a part of people's path, in complete agreement, because if it wasn't for me walking these paths, I wouldn't have learned what I've learned to get to where I'm at right now.
That's right.
At the same time, what I'm also saying through the stance, like at least, well, here, let me clean the slate. My goal, or at least my purpose with my message is really just to there's no point. It's futile to try to save, quote unquote, save everyone. Nor is that my duty or even my right to be able to try to infringe on anyone's sovereign capacity to make their own choice. However, what I do have an issue with is when the blanket mass consensus of reality is that people do not have a choice, or there is a dissuading of the consciousness of humanity that we are powerless, or this is a common theme. And that's what I have an issue with. If people want to choose to feel powerless and hopeless and create a victim narrative, I honor them to do so because that's the sovereignty. Once we're there, it's never I look down on you. It's like, oh, you're choosing that. Cool. However that serves you, that's how it serves you. However, the issue I have is when I see a lot of the individuals who are playing this game and masquerading as if they don't have the choice. It's like, whoa, this is getting weird. Because now you're pretending or making this odd play that you don't recognize as a play, that you're somewhat in control of. Like, we're not in control of what comes our way. We're in control of how we respond to it and perceive it, right? And yet we can always choose to perceive that. We can create the reality where we're powerless. We can create the reality where there's no God, where nothing is, blah, blah, blah. Fine. You're entitled to create all of that. However, to have no awareness or to almost hinder and or hide or disguise the fact that we do not have that choice is I don't want to call it insidious because I don't like to think that there's some big bad guy doing this thing. I feel like all is working out as it should. And that, if you don't see God in all, you won't see God at all, right? And when I think about what lights me up and what is purposeful to me, it is to say, hey, brothers and sisters, I love you. Do whatever the fuck you want. And we're all making this choice right now. And so with that, what I'd love to say is, like you said, if someone's too stuck in a narrative, like, this is my thing. And so please, as a psychotherapist, if you're finding things to poke at me and or illuminate me to or challenge me, I completely welcome that because I don't want to be inefficient with my energy and my passion and my time and purpose. And also I'd like to learn. I'm always willing to learn and to be challenged and to learn new things. So anyways, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And maybe you want to get a little bit more specific or which direction to go. But I mean, I hear you. And as I'm observing my own mind being present in this moment, it's like, from what doorway do I want to enter into this conversation? Because it's infinite ways of looking at this topic. Yeah. And for me to sit here and be like, this is the way, all of a sudden I feel like limits me and us in having this discussion. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, what is my belief for me today based on where I'm at in life is that I will always have a choice no matter how cornered I may be.
Agreed. That's it.
right?
And that we all do. Would you agree?
We all do, but which storyteller is telling the story of our lives in any given moment?
Yeah.
And who's to say that you or me sitting here complaining about the complainers in and of itself is not a way of feeling like a victim of this reality where people are complaining so much. Why are they complaining? And I'm complaining about people that are complaining. So therefore I'm a victim too in that sense. And it's
you could angle it that way.
right.
Yeah.
But if you kind of zoom out and you're like, shit, this is a journey for all of us,
Yeah.
then how productive am I being in saying that everybody has a choice? And that is a powerful message, but how can I guess I ask myself, how can I be more effective in helping the people that I believe that that are choiceless to believe that they have a choice? And in my experience, more often than not, with sitting with these people is to honor them almost believing how much they don't have a choice. Does that make sense?
That's amazing. Yeah, bro. I'm loving this so much.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, yes, I mean, these thoughts go in my mind, you know, like back in the day, I did music. I was under Ptolemaic the Messenger, and I was doing like really preachy new age music, you know what I mean? And I've always been passionate speaker. I've always been this person who, like, I have to be driven by purpose. Otherwise, I lose sight of myself. It's like, what am I doing here? And yet, all of this stuff still exists. And yet, there's also the recognition that saviorhood is, there's a certain limit, or there's a certain threshold where altruism becomes saviorhood and starts to infringe upon someone's sovereignty of consent and choice, right? And what you're saying right now in regards to what is impactful, what is actually effective, that's the funny fucking thing. And and yet, what I will say, not in rebuttal to that, but more so in regards to like clarity, in regards to like,
Stretching it.
Yeah, or am I even trying to affect those people to get them to change? Not necessarily. Like I'm in complete contentment with most of humanity being caught up in victimhood or wanting to choose a misery story, because I recognize that, you know, there's a certain amount of oil and water, right? There's a certain amount of light and dark. Like they cannot, there's a balance point, right? So to try to, there's no part of me that's like, oh, I need to diminish the dark. That was old, like I'm a light, you know, BS. That's not it. There is a point where it's like, hey, there's maybe a way that we can wield this power of creation and destruction responsibly somewhat, or at least have it be the main line, like the common consensus, so that then everyone can go out, but the actual, I guess, law and order of this co-creative reality is at least in a space of neutrality, instead of in a space of where I see things going right now, which is in a space of like somewhat lawlessness and anarchy and like honestly glamorizing the victim, glamorizing the emotionally irregulated, glamorizing and popularizing lack of virtue and merit and ethics. You know what I mean? So I think maybe it's not so much of me trying to save them. It's more so like, hey, if that's what people want to do, that's what people are going to do. However, if we're at the base level if we're literally perpetuating through our media, which is trillions of dollars, social media, all these things and so forth, and like the baseline is that, and that's being glamorized, it's like, well, that's a little dark. That's a little dystopian
right.
for me.
I mean, you're talking about the suffering that type of ideology can create on a societal level. Right. And I think it probably would have been wise of us to kind of distinguish about where I stand on a personal approach to victimhood, and what do I think is happening on a societal level, and what do I see as a clinician, right? There's so many different ways of stepping into that space.
Yeah.
As a clinician, I will never believe in my heart and in my mind that the person that's stepping into my office or the Zoom call or the audio call is a victim. I will never see them as that.
Yeah. Right.
I will they may be sitting there complaining and crying, and all I'm seeing is a hero in the making. I see a beautiful being with that has somehow found themselves humble enough to ask for help and want help and share their pain and to trust another being and to find themselves worthy of putting themselves in a space of healing. I don't care how much they're crying. And I believe, as Ram Dass says, the karma will eventually exhaust itself and leave. So from a clinical point of view and from a space holder point of view, I will believe the shit out of you even when you think you don't believe it yourself. Because despite how much there is one storyteller that's telling a certain story, we are a multi-storied being, and there's different stories that are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So, this might sound like a harsh example, but, it's happened before where a client comes in and speaks about being raped. And of course, it's a victim story, right? But even if you listen to that story careful enough and you slow that story down, you're going to find so many heroics moments in that story where it's like, all right, how did it happen? Well, this person came and they forced themselves upon me. Okay, but hold on. Like with the first try, no, I grabbed their hand. So then that happened. No, then I slapped the person. It's like, what made you do that? Because I'm not going to just go out easy. I will stand up for who I am. Where'd you learn that from? I learned it from my grandma. She always made sure that you will stand on your feet no matter what the hell is happening to you. So all of a sudden, we're extracting that other part of the story out of the other story.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they find themselves to be a lot more than who they thought they were, and that it's not about what happened to them, but how they rose to the occasion.
Yeah.
But they had to speak their victim narrative before we can find alternative narratives.
Yeah.
So I have so much reverence for the victim narrative because it gives me the opportunity to find the other places within that story.
Yeah.
Was that example too harsh?
Not at all. No. Spot on, bro.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this happens in so many ways. I mean, different example is like, the guy I hated, he called me and this is like stories of old clients. And it's that, I became weak and I was like, come over and, let's do it. Why am I so weak? Like he takes advantage of me. It's like, all right, well, he called you, tell me what happened. Well, the phone rang and then you picked it up? No. How many times did it ring? Like 4 times. What was the thought between each ring? Well, I'm not going to do it. I'm better than that. And then the second ring, I've worked, I promised myself that I won't. So there's so many stories that you can extract out of a victim story that would get the client pulled out of that victim narrative. And all of a sudden there's another narrative. Yeah. And if you're a good space holder that honors different narratives, you're going to help them step into the other narrative.
Right.
All you needed was a client that was willing to come and sit in front of you. Yeah. And so I find myself too caught up sometimes in the heroic act of showing up that I forget that people are being victims of one narrative. Now, the irony of what I'm speaking to when I'm talking about all these multi-narrative beings comes from narrative therapy. And narrative therapy is the most dominant psychological modality of postmodernism. So, that's where I learned it from. And I spent years in postmodernism trying to learn narrative therapy until at some point I was like, all right, if you go too far out, there's some cuckoo-ness to it. But at a certain point, there's so much beauty. So I guess I'm here today to say that it's bigger than making it black and white. And it's necessary to make it black and white sometimes, especially when it comes to making policies. I'm talking too much. Go ahead.
No, you're not talking too much. I love how you're talking and then you analyze what's going on and then you're talking, you're like, we could have done this way. We could have done it that way. Yeah. I'm talking too much. No, it was all perfect. It's all, this is groovy, bro. I don't usually use that word, but it's a groove. It's a groove thing happening. what you left off with is policies. The thing is,
Policies, and that seems like to be an area that for you is really important. So let's honor that and have a conversation about the damage of a victim ideology or ideology of victimhood being spread out, and in what ways is it creating damage?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's, for one, I always think about the children. I always think about the youth. I think about my unborn children. I think about the legacies to come. I also just think about, I'm grateful for everything that's happening, because it's kind of like having your room get really messy and you're like, oh shit, we got to clean up this room. We got to clean up this house. It's like, you kind of have to have things like, oh shoot, the fridge. Like, oh man, there's something like moldy in the fridge. We got to clean out this fucking fridge. This is bad. For humanity, not everyone's that type A or whatever type it is that is just like super organized and takes care of everything, blah, blah. Like a lot of humans are messy. And I feel like we've come to this point where we're getting really, really effing messy. And we're having to look at what we've created. A lot of that comes into space of policy. It comes into the space of, and these are the specific policies that get me riled up is when I find that there are specific things that are being put forth that are being shown in a space of altruism and loving care, and are actually somewhat insidious in how they strip away individuals' freedoms and or like sovereignty and divinity of power and choice, and wrap it in a blanket that makes it like that puts it forth as though they're being empowered in doing that. And there's a lot there.
Would you care to give an example of what you're speaking?
Yeah, I mean,
so that way it won't be in such a heady place. You know.
Sure. Yeah, we can totally get canceled right now. Specifically in regards to preferred pronouns and trying to enforce these types of things, I have no problem with people wanting to be called exactly what they're called, right? However, to try to infringe someone else's, or even hate speech, for instance, right? Like, do I want people to be saying specific types of words? Absolutely not. But there's a specific thing when it comes to freedom of speech. There's a specific thing that you can say as long as you're not actually potentially going to, actually cause violence, or there's some sort of incited violence and or threat of violence. Freedom of speech is that some guy can choose to be the most loving person ever or the biggest asshole, worst piece of shit. That's a part of our sovereignty. There's something there. The way that I tie it together is that I'll break it down here in a way that I wanted to get to with you. The thing that's really made things not black and white, but kind of turned everything on its head for me, because you talked about earlier about how we come into this world not feeling necessarily worthy
or powerless,
trying to rise up. Yeah. And I've always wondered what that's from. Is it from back in the day of Sumerian times when we're spliced with alien DNA? Is it because of, religious dogma? What is it from? I don't know. I'm not going to try to quantify it. However,
maybe it's just being a baby and a child.
Maybe. But what I will say is, when you have kids, do you want them to have a better life than you? Okay. Do you want them to be better than you? Do you want them to just receive so much love and feel your love, and you just want to love them unconditionally and have them always feel love, not feel shame? Great. That sounds like a good parent. It sounds like a normal parent, right? How come when it comes to the inside, like the deep core wounding of humanity, we feel that our divine parent wants the opposite for us? And we're supposed to be less than. Like, it's almost like, oh, thinking you're a child of God and you're supposed to be better than God? Oh, that's blasphemy. And it's like, well, what if you have a responsibility to actually be the progeny of your divine parent? Then all of a sudden, you're expected to be great. You're expected to be more. You have a responsibility to wield this awesome power of creation and destruction and have that discernment in between. And you're amongst other co-creators, other children of God. Like, what an amazing platform. And yet all of a sudden there, it's like, holy shit, that's big. And then it's like, oh, actually, no, let's forget that, because that's too much responsibility. Let's go back to being small, where I'm powerless. Oh, that's so much safer. Oh, now I can fuck around. Now that responsibility doesn't exist. Okay, yeah, that was just a figment of my imagination. But that can be real. And if it is real, and it is real, is what I will say, in that reality, we can create an infinite multitude of narratives or realities based on our perception, including those of which we're powerless and that we're victims and all these things. However, is that the ultimate truth? Is that the objective truth? And I would say no. But yeah. And then how that ties, that's my biggest thing when it comes to these specific laws or regulations or so forth that take away people's sovereignty under the guise of caring for them and or being altruistic and so forth, when it actually comes, it's also infringing on other people's sovereignty. So when we're actually coming to the space of respecting all individuals as having the sovereign choice to participate in this game of life and this co-creation, and being like, I want to choose to be part of this. I do not want to choose to be part of this. I cannot infringe upon you to do anything because I respect you. Namaste, like I see the divinity within you. I feel like in order for us to actually come to that space of actually having that divine reverence, we actually have to understand the impact of being that like fully wielding, divine child of God. And that only when we fully have that be common consensus and understand that choice is our power.
So then what do you do with people that don't believe in God?
I mean, this is my thing. Is that
I'm speaking?
Yeah.
I'm speaking to the child of God thing.
100%,
right?
And my whole point is that
And
like
the divine mother and father.
Once again, that reality is able to be created based on what I've just said.
Right.
So it doesn't disprove what I've just said. It actually, anything that we create that is a powerless narrative is the proliferation of being all powerful and being able to create your reality as you see fit based on your perception and how you respond to it, right? And that you're ultimately worthy, and that even the perception of being less worthy is just a cop out of your own responsibility to be great. It's like, is it really the opposite?
So just to have fun with this topic, and then bring it back to the groups of people that you may be kind of wanting to go against, or you don't agree with, that's probably a better word to use, that want a certain type of ideology, where their ideology is like, let's bring down power. Right? That's kind of what you're saying that they're doing essentially, and they don't...
Not necessarily, but some are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, there is that space of rebellion. There's that space of anarchy. There's that space of like, we don't know what's better, but we don't like this, and so the only way is to be emotionally regulated.
So how do you... And I'm just entertaining it. I'm
not,
not
please. Yeah, we're being hypothetical.
We're opening this thing up.
Yeah.
You don't see that action in their own way is an attempt to become powerful?
No, it is. But it's so if we're looking at, this tantrum culture, this emotionally irregulated, like screaming, like just complete, this is what happens when, kids aren't taught boundaries. There's unhealthy boundaries. There's unhealthy dynamics. It's like there's so many points of blame, but it's just all what's happening in order for us to look at that room, right?
Right.
Becoming powerful is not something that you attain. It's something that you accept. So if we're trying to establish it through outside means, especially in the space of like, you ruined everything, like all these billionaires and blah blah, these people who took risks, who learned about business, who like look at people like Mark Cuban or whoever it is, people who grinded and fucking really made things happen, and then they have all this money. It's all invested in businesses. They're creating jobs. Like, people don't understand how the economy works. For one, we weren't taught that. So it's like, whose fault is it? Once again, we go in a cycle of blame. But ultimately, is that really our most effective way of gaining power? No, it's not. It's almost a self-defeating prophecy, because at a certain level, the subconscious of these individuals know that what they're doing is just a ruse. But it feels good to explode this passion, because like, oh, this creative energy that I could be using towards creating something magnificent. I'm so potent, and I have all this, and I don't have anywhere else to go. The only funnel that I can go to that's effortless is just to be mad at everyone and to blame others, because to take accountability is so frightening. I've been there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of why I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been the protester. I went that route. And then I was like, after coming back from Standing Rock and learning from the uncles and the grandfathers, and these grandfathers, or the grandmothers and grandfathers and the uncles over there, and singing the songs and being a part of that like culture where it's like got this grief to it, where it's like, oh man, pray for it. It's a different type of prayer. It's not like, please God. It's like it's on your knees type of prayer, and a gratitude and a connecting with the earth and connecting with nature. It's different.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and it's almost to like go with that narrative. I think it would be very easy for both of us to do. I guess there is a part of me, for the sake of honoring this conversation, is wondering, and then what else is there? But to kind of mirror what you're saying, this is a second career for me. I was in the business world in my entire 20s.
Gotcha.
And so then I went to grad school
Yeah.
in my 30s. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? Right? I open up the cultural diversity book and I'm literally getting energetically drained. And it felt like there's poison going into my body. That was my honest reaction. I was like, this is divide and conquer. This is separation.
Yeah.
But more than everything, I was reading and being taught how essentially you are oppressed and that there is somebody lighter than you that has privilege and has power. And that is not aligned with how I viewed the world.
Yeah.
Is my best way of feeling empowered to be taught how little power I have? Or is it for me to be able to realize how powerful I am? I much rather learn about my ancestors and all the things that makes me great before even wanting to learn about what the fuck is wrong with everything else is around me.
Agreed.
You know, I need that part of me that's within me, that's always inside of me to be solid enough as I enter to the darkness of the unknown and the monsters of the oppressors or whatever.
Yeah.
So there is definitely this backward ideology. And you know, so that was, you know, school, universities for me was definitely a place of suffering in many ways.
It's indoctrination.
It was. Yeah. And it almost felt like to some extent I'm in crazy land.
Yeah.
You know, I thought I'm stepping into the second part of my career in my life to be a light barrier of this planet. And I'm like, holy shit, it seems like suffering is being taught in these environments.
And suffering's always a choice, right? Pain is inevitable, but suffering's a choice.
Exactly. Exactly. And so the thing was that, the idea is that, you know, we're never going to be able to get rid of pain. We're going to be able to change our relationship with pain, and we're going to learn how to dance with pain. But what they would say to me was, like, the professors, I guess, were like, well, there are stages and you got to go through the stages of like anger and all of that. Yeah. And I'm like, well, that may be true, but to teach it in such a universal way seems a little too manipulative.
Yeah.
Not everybody needs to go to the stage of let's be angry at the white man and burn things and shut things down. And what I recognize that's happening on that upper level was that they themselves were still holding on to a lot of pain, and they were tired of not being able to get what they wanted to get, whether it was through the feminist movement, whether it was through the hippie movement. Right. And they saw themselves as people that continuously tried and tried and tried. Yeah. And they felt like they were often defeated. Yeah. So now they accessed a philosophy that could support them to bring everything that was in power down. Kind of like, and it seemed like they're willing to do it at the expense of burning everything down with themselves, which kind of gives you the Khaleesi archetype from Game of Thrones. Yeah. You know, and I was like, holy shit, this is kind of crazy. Yeah. There was no teachings of love. There was no teachings of oneness. There was no teachings of celebrating who you are as an essence. So I agree with you in that regard. And while we're saying that that approach is wrong, I don't think the older approaches were necessarily the best approaches either.
I agree.
You know, and to sit here and pretend, I mean, this generation has been left with the least amount of whatever America has to offer compared to the generations before. And there's a truth in that. And for us to pretend that that's not true is bullshit. For us to pretend that our capitalism doesn't come on the backs of people in the third world, then we're lying to ourselves. Totally. And this generation seems to have a lot more sensitivity towards the people that bring us the beauty of capitalism. But the more traditional ones and the conservative ones want to pretend that that's not the case, and still capitalism is definitely, it has some issues, but it's like, no, it has a little bit more than some issues. It has some real humanitarian type of problems.
Agreed.
And we got to be able to have those conversations while saying that maybe capitalism at the end of the day still is probably better than just about any other alternative. You see, we got to be able to have these conversations outside of a black and white way. And the only way we can do that is to step into a place of love.
Yeah.
And for me and you to honor this microphone as a sacred tool to say, yes, we hear everybody saying, are you this? Are you that? We should do this. We shouldn't do that. And be like, how can we bring more color to this conversation?
Oh, yeah. Agreed. I feel like I've said this to a lot of my guests, in that what I love about individuals like yourself is that you're a unique color. And what you're talking about and bringing a new color, I feel like we are creating colors. And one of the things that at least I would say that I would reframe is that I think that we're getting the best this country's had to offer yet. Because in this, I'm not ungrateful for the suffering. I'm not upset at the suffering. I'm not upset at all the fucked upness. Because like you were saying earlier when I said art, when you were talking about what has been brought about, like I am literally I am an offspring of art. And when I say art, I mean everything from the way that I speak, the way that I walk, the way that I dance, the way that I talk, like music, literal fashion, everything has come about through this very interesting arc of suffering that has been taught. Like even the whole narrative of slavery and racism for African American people, there's been enslavement throughout the entire world. There is not the same type of narrative and archetype that exists in America, and there's been slavery for way longer periods of time in all different types of countries. However, the amount of art and just in the potency of the suffering, what has been sprouted from this in America is very, very unique. And it's created an incredible arc for African American people to come about to this like ultimate rise and crescendo of being leaders of this new world in a way that is starting to come about, as I see, as like the new civil rights movement 0.2, you know, like I don't think Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or anyone would be happy with necessarily how things are going right now. However, I feel like there is this new underbelly that's showing itself that is allowing for us to clean up that room and like really come to a place of like owning the responsibility of everything and showing up in a way that kind of blows everyone out of the water. And I don't think that opportunity would exist without all of the fucked upness that has occurred. It almost allows for everything to be rectified in a way that is a mic drop, rather than an anarchy type of like burn the whole thing down. So I went a lot of different ways there, but my whole point is that when I think about what there is to be grateful for, like when we say we have like the worst of it, like, yeah, we're printing more money than we've ever had in 2021 and creating inflation that's insane. We're trying to put up the minimum wage when all it does is make everything more expensive, but people don't understand the economy.
Right.
Point being, I feel like it needs to get bad before it gets better. And that in this, and then even in this badness, like for a while, we've had smartphones for a while, right? We literally have everything at our fingertips. Like you can become pretty much anything you want to be utilizing the internet. So when we talk about our inability or incapacity to do something, it's like people around the world in other countries are doing a lot more than Americans are, and we have everything at our fingertips. Some stuff that we find is like, oh, it's off the backs of third world countries, and yet we're still using iPhones, we're still using Androids. We're eating avocado toast, which are, these cartels are taking away the farmers in Michoacan and other places like that and making them work as slaves to work their avocado fields that are legacy avocado farms, and we're just still eating avocado toast. And so it gets to the point where it behooves us to utilize what we're doing, whether that's a vegan choosing to eat meat like my last client, or someone choosing to, what the fuck, if they need to eat the avocado toast in order to make a bigger impact on the world, fine. For us to shame ourselves for these little things or be a capitalist or whatever and be merging into that system, but to do it in a more integral way and or be that person who ascends and has a certain point of power who can then implement change. Whatever we need to do to get to those spaces, I feel like is the most responsible. And when I say responsible, I mean responsible in regards to our sovereign power and divinity. That's the most responsible thing to do, rather than for us to necessarily complain about it or to say, hey, you're doing it wrong. You need to change it. Because even us having this discourse, I feel like the natural evolution of that is not just for this to get into the heads of the people. I feel like it is to build us to the space where we have influential power and or power to create businesses. I feel like it's always a creation that is the solution rather than necessarily the destruction. The destruction happens through the decay and so forth like that. But like if we just keep creating positively, that is how we influence change, right? Sorry, that was a lot, but yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. Thank you.
Went a lot of ways. Yeah. Shoo. This has been like for most of the clients who've come in, or my clients, I'm not at work. Most of the guests who've come in here, it's been like, okay, I know their story. They've had like a near-death experience or something. This has happened. With you, I feel like I'm talking to a professional. I'm talking to someone whose opinion on these topics I really value, and I really value the ability to kind of have this like, hey, what about this? You know what I mean? Because like I don't want to just be in an echo chamber. So I appreciate that. And yeah, and is there something that you feel like you could speak to what I just said that would maybe be challenging, or something that's on your mind that's alive for you that you need to say?
I'm sitting with it, brother. I'm sitting with it. And I like to sit with the pain of not knowing and not having an answer that you already had in your chamber. Like to kind of sit with this person that I'm sitting with and like, all right, I want like the world to kind of be able to see that, look, I'm not here saying I have the answers.
Yeah.
You know, but it's going to require for us to sit here and have these conversations. Yeah. And not from a place of, let me tell you how people are doing it wrong and how right I am. You know, and I'm not to say that's what you're doing. I just didn't want this podcast to ever go there.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to look me more sexier and smarter if I was to speak about like, let me tell you guys about, right? But it's like, I think we should kind of like, I don't like the saying, but normalize like sitting in the unknown and being like, who the fuck knows? What's really the problem? It's easy to say these kids are just fucking nagging the whole time, you know, and they do seem like they are, you know. It's like, what's the matter with you? But it's like, what's the answer? What's the solution here? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And I don't know if there is a solution, but the only way is for us to not be so tribal with each other and to be able to sit and have conversations and for us to not be so opinionated, I think is actually important. So how do we have conversations without being so opinionated about how existence should be for all? I don't know, but I want to learn about the art of that. I want to ask more questions than pretend that I have the answers. But like you said, it's probably going to get worse in some sense to get better. It's going to get a little bit ugly. I think timelines are kind of colliding and smashing and merging. I do believe that this younger generation, despite how they may seem like they're complaining a little bit more than they should, tend to be the most gentle, beautiful, kind-hearted generations we've ever seen. I do believe that, man. And it's like, I can't leave that part out while being so annoyed at them for just fucking wanting to tear everything down because they're angry, you know? But yes, I will sit here and agree with you that if I want to create change, it's going to start with myself first.
Oh, yeah.
That's my best bet.
Yeah.
And similar to you, I was in protest since I was a child. My mom would take me since I was 7, you know? And, I was mad at the white man as I was heavily influenced by Malcolm X in my 20s. Those parts of me needed to be exhausted, man, before I can sit here today and be like, you know what? Change starts with me. You know?
Yeah.
But
I like that.
But nobody was there in my 20s to be like, hey, I know you're mad at like the white man and the racist person and all of that, but like, I hear you. Your pain is valid. I love you. And there is something to your pain.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
I'm hoping to be the person maybe I needed for me, because my options were limited even then.
Yeah.
It was either it's this or that.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the alternative. How do we blend in the objective reality with the subjective reality? Subjective being postmodernism and objective being modernism. How do we bring the left and the right brain together? How does the masculine, the feminine come together in union? You know?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. I love how you said that part of you needed to be exhausted, because I feel like I can relate to that sentiment in so many ways, as I've lived all these different caricatures as well. Or they weren't even caricatures. That's belittling them. They were aspects of myself. They were growth edges. They were just who I was during that point in time. And a lot of those needed to be exhausted. The rebel, the savior, the supreme altruist, all these things, right? The light bearer, like you said, like the light worker, that's just light, not embracing the shadow, all these things. And I would agree. I think sitting in the unknown is important. I think that being able to have these discussions also allows for us, similarly to comedy, to be able to just kind of make light of our tragedy and have discourse of them and be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Because I don't think that any one man is going to create any type of solution. I think that that's completely just supremely egoic and insane. This is when I'm talking about these concepts, all I'm saying is like, oh, I've recognized a way for me to literally cut away any sense of unworthiness, which is also somewhat of a mindfuck too. Because when your surroundings don't necessarily match that, then you're like, whoa, I'm literally supremely worthy and responsible, and yet I'm still living in this human existence with human finite capacities and based on, the life that I chose or was born into and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And yet, there's so much there in regards to honoring what needs to be exhausted, like you said.
Yeah.
And like we've seen that from potentially our parents and or past lineages, like you talked about, the hippie movement, civil rights movement, feminist movement, and so forth. And now we're seeing a lot of those people being like, this was right, this was wrong, and maybe that's what's going to happen with these Gen Zers or whatever the new generation is. And I'm not necessarily, when I speak about this stuff, I'm not just pointing at them. It's all generations. There's people in all generations, all ages, who are caught up. There are a lot of older children, I would say, who aren't necessarily matured into adults yet. Their bodies are aging rapidly, increasingly, right? There's a certain level of accountability that I feel comes about with being in whatever we call an adult or anything like that, right? And that being said, I feel like the first step, and I'd love to talk about therapy and the impact of therapy with you after this, but I think one of the first steps for us to be able to have these types of discussions and just conversations, I think it's okay to be opinionated, but we can never have a conversation because people will be opinionated. We can't just control that. But what we can learn to control, or at least normalize, is emotional regulation. Like, that's one of the biggest issues I have when, it's hard for me not to go to that rebellion space or like, oh, look at these people put in all this stuff. It's the Illuminati type of mindset. But it's like, airtime is precious. Airtime, how much does a Super Bowl commercial cost? You know what I mean? Millions of dollars. How much does hours, days worth of news time cost? How many millions of dollars? You know what I mean? Hundreds of millions of dollars. And how much do we glamorize emotional regulation? How much do we glamorize all these things that we're talking about right now in order to perpetuate them and either get people riled up about them so that they can get mad at their kids or whatever else or be mad at society, or to show other people what normalcy is? Like, oh, this is normal. This is the way to do it. This is being an activist. This is being this. This is how you initiate change, right? And it's like, we'll never get to a place of being able to have conversations. Not never, but we will be severely impeded in being able to have conversations that are effective if one side or both sides find it to be normalcy to be emotionally regulated.
And what does that require, in your opinion, to be able to do that? What do conversations truly require in order for them to be effective? And opinions to be effective, what do you think the requirement is?
I don't think there's a requirement. What I was alluding to is that emotional regulation and having that be normalized is
so how do we
cuts it in the butt.
That?
To normalize emotional regulation, I think the first step, once again, to tell someone to do something because they should do it is like shitting on someone. Like,
That's right.
You know, however, if we come to this space of like consensus, especially from the top down, that it's like everyone deserves respect, and here's why. And I know it's like religious, spiritual, blah blah blah, but like if we really, this came to me and it just makes so much sense to me, and maybe it doesn't make sense to everyone else, but like for me to be like, all parents, every single person that I ask wants their child to be better, wants their child to be more, wants them to live a better life than them, wants them to feel loved, blah, blah. Why are we not thinking that about ourselves? Even if we're witnessing it from our parents, there must be something in us that makes us think that this higher supreme force or whatever it is, creator, is not wanting that for us. Why? Why don't we allow for ourselves to feel the same way about our divine parent or this overseeing force, whatever the fuck it is? Make it up. Who cares? But if you're going to want that for your kids, why aren't you allowing yourself to feel that from this beingness that brought you here, that's more than just your physical parents? Because if your parents gave you that and you still have unworthiness, why? Right? And so regardless, if you have that and we are worthy and you have a responsibility to be great, and you also have the choice to dictate your reality, even, all right, you know what, scratch the spiritual thing. If we just recognize that in every moment we have a choice to respond to our reality, cool, you're powerful, great, respect everyone's choice. That seems like a simple solution to me, to be honest.
But a big ask.
Is it? Damn it.
That's ultimately the end goal of the victim archetype's journey, to recognize that you always have a choice, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, and you're speaking to, man, all it takes is the remembrance that you are the child of God, and that there is a force that is so loving and so kind, and that you're so protected, that's here to help you no matter what. It's not about whose pain is bigger or which hand you were given. Yeah. But it's just about knowing that ultimately you have a choice no matter what kind of hand you've been given. Yeah. But some people may be mad at God in some very deep unconscious or subconscious way, and this is them throwing their tantrum. Yeah. And for me to be like, but he fucking loves you. Don't you get it? What's wrong with you? You see, that may just push that person even further. And my thing is, what I'm looking for is like, what's my best bet at helping somebody to activate that remembrance? Yeah. And perhaps it is for me to be as open-hearted and as honest and as loving as I possibly can be, to hopefully carry something godly in that moment to deliver when they feel too far from God. And maybe they can experience me as some sort of a representative of the divine, and be like, that's kind of feels good. I can trust that. I don't like you. You put me on a wheelchair. You fucking made me confused about this and that. And it's like, you know, I see so many people trying to tell these people how it's like, what's the worst thing you can do to somebody that's feeling like a victim is to tell them that they're a victim, you know? And that's, it's such an easy thing to do. Yeah. So then I'm going to be like, then I'm coming from a place of ego if that's my message. And the most honest thing I could do for me is to tell them that, look, man, I still feel like a victim in my life at times. I still deal with a mother that was not the mother I needed as a child. And as she keeps getting older, month by month, I have to step into this new version of accepting something that I maybe don't want to accept. And if I'm not accepting it, I fall into that, why me? This is unfair. I didn't have what I wanted, and now this is what's happening, and it's not getting any better. Yeah. You see, I can fall into that as a psychotherapist, life coach, whatever, blah, 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 blah.
Because you're human too.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think if I access that part of myself in a vulnerable way, and I'm connected to my heart, that is my best bet at somebody who feels like there's a victim, that they're being seen. And that part of them that needs to be heard all of a sudden moves a little bit. You know? So I guess a lot of my I'm selfishly sitting here in front of you trying to figure out like how can we give this message out, because you're already doing that with your other shows and with your other episodes and your book, and I'm like, all right, how can me and Sean come here together and be confused together and look sloppy together, and
I'm loving it,
and somehow hopefully not give him his worst episode ever, because it's not going to be so like, let's tell you guys what you guys need to feel, but more so about like, what the fuck is going on, you know?
Bro, this is no, the fact that we're, for one, these are conversations. We're eternalizing a conversation. So for one, I'm honored to get to know you better. I'm honored to be able to share this space. I'm honored to have this discourse. And the fact that we get to, like, you know, we can look at these screens and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, we're recording. But really, I'm just here with you. And, you know, what I'll say is yes to everything you've said. And when we talk about like, what is that thing? What is that solution or whatever? Which really is like the solution is so many things. It's a collaborative, co-creative effort, as this thing is the engine of co-creation, as you called it. However, the one thing that juices me up, that it inspires me, that I want, is modeling. Right? Like why is the ability to, like, ultimately, like whether it's Sacred Sons or whether it's like how you work in therapy or so forth, to have interactions be modeled in a way that isn't super fucking, you know, 80s self-help movie corny or self-help video corny type shit, you know what I mean? But it's like real deal, like, hey, this is real shit. This is how we can respond. These are the reasons why. And this is also why I'm working on animations right now, to make these high level concepts in a way that like makes sense for an ADHD / younger brain, in a way that's like, oh shit, that's what they're saying. It's not just words. It's not just like high level concepts. Like, oh fuck, that makes sense to me in my brain, but I've never actually reaffirmed it outside of this psychedelic type of hallucinogenic space in my head where I'm like, oh shit, that's really complex of a way of thinking about my reality from an aerial perspective and all these infinite realities that I can choose. But instead I'm just like, no, I'm in this world with my how many friends and my family who operates this way, and I'm caught in this little loop of dynamics there. And then with my friends, they act this way, so I'm just stuck there. It's like, oh wow, there is this other way. Oh, wow, based on how I'm doing with them, that's leading me in this trajectory this way. Oh, how I show up with these people based on this. Oh, I can literally be with my family showing up a different way. And even if they don't choose to receive me, okay, I can choose to be that way. I go to work or I choose to go here. I show up in the way that I want to and how I feel appropriately. And that can lead me to a trajectory of greatness or whatever the fuck I want to create. Right? Oh, wow. That type of avenue. And modeling of just, or not and modeling just discourse. Like, oh, something comes up that you find, you know, that would trigger. Or like, what the fuck is a trigger? What is emotional regulation? What is emotional irregulation? What is the way that we can respect each other? Why are the reasons we can respect each other? All these things, like the lack of these things, I feel is irresponsible. I feel is also, I don't want to say insidious because I don't like to feel like there's this evil force and it's trying to take over. And at the same time, I feel like there is this pressure that is pushing us and will cause some gnarliness if we don't, as people who are, you know, coming forth in this way and are obviously purposeful in the opposition of it or in the opposite force of it, to bring about that balance, right? Like, we are literally feeling called to be this, to push against that force. It's not like, oh, this force is so bad, kill it. It's always going to be there. But it's like, hey, it's almost like a... That's a bad analogy, but it's like, you know, one of those arcade games where there's like all the coins and the thing keeps sliding the coins off and like somehow we're trying to keep the coins on. I don't know. That's how my mind's seeing it.
Yeah.
But
it sounds like you're a little worried.
You know, that's a good point. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that to my awareness. I'd say yes. I feel like there's, if I'm not purposeful about it, it feels like I'm not being truthful to myself. It sort of feels like, you know, there's a candle that fell in the other room and it's like starting to light on fire and you just pretend like it's not happening. It's like, that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's happening. So are you going to wait for someone else to do something about it? Especially if you're the one who's... I mean, that's a pretty big analogy. So you are scared. You're afraid of things burning. One more so, it's like, if there's damage happening, to just allow for it to, if I loved the fire, it'd be different. If I wanted the place to burn, it'd be different. You know, it's like in that moment of, I feel like the place of fearfulness and worry would happen if I was not taking action and being purposeful about it.
Fear would happen if you weren't purposeful about it.
Yeah. Because all I can do is what I do. And I'm not saying, I don't believe that I will be the implementer of the massive change, blah, 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 blah. However, if I'm not doing what I feel inside of myself called to do, then that is when the negative, like the really gnarly stuff comes about. The icky feelings, the worry, the fear, the blah, blah, blah. But if I'm feeling called to do something about it, and, 90% of humanity isn't, should I just choose to be like them? Or is it like, oh no, I'm actually potentially a part of this wave of whatever it is that's working that way? So it's like, not so much to be feared about. It's more to like, okay, this is my path. I'm like accepting it, and as long as I'm doing what I'm doing the best I can, and that's what it is. But I guess if to your point, there is a sense of urgency, but I feel like the worry and the fear only comes about if there is no action taken upon it by myself.
I'm objectively trying to examine that sentence. I mean, is it possible for me to do everything that I possibly can and be as intentional and purposeful as I can, and for my fear to not be there anymore? And I think the fear can still be there, right?
I guess so.
Yeah, and if I'm viewing this, what's happening potentially as a possibility of causing a lot of damage to where we live, then there is something that I'm going to be afraid of. And I think to have that fear is a very healthy thing, and it's a normal thing.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
And
I think it's okay for us to say, okay, I'm scared of what's happening. I'm not saying that you're feeling the fear, but sometimes I fear. I am afraid, of what can happen, and how we can pretty much kind of collapse in our own laziness or lack of paying attention to things, because that seems like what's been happening in Los Angeles, right? I mean, you're just seeing it, and it's a little out of hand. I was in Venice. I left Venice a few months ago, but there was it was completely okay for somebody for a machete to be in my backyard.
Shit. Yeah.
So, and I'm going to sit here and be like, well, as long as I'm being intentional and purposeful with my life, I shouldn't be scared of this guy with the machete. If I had a child, like, what the fuck, So of course I'm going to be scared. And I think your fear and your pain should be all of our fears. And when people are acting like they're not scared, it's probably even feels more crazier.
100%.
You know?
Yeah. Okay, if you're talking about, those specific fears, absolutely.
Yeah.
On a scale when it comes to policy and stuff like that, absolutely.
Yeah.
And continue, but in that topic, I think there's a lot to say about boundaries as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what?
Well, specifically, and I'm curious about your I'm curious about how you perceive instilling boundaries with human children. For me specifically, I was spanked but not physically abused. If anything, I was more emotionally and mentally abused when I was older. However, I'm a really great dog dad. I'm not like a kid dad yet, right? But I was spanked, not like spanked all the time, but like when I was out of line, I was spanked. Do I feel like you need to spank your kids all the time? No. Do I think that we should be
This is a very specific topic you're bringing out of nowhere. I'm trying to understand. Like, are we talking about hitting kids right now, children?
well, see,
talk about a perfect segue.
Yeah, right. No. Well, okay, here. Let me.
No, I don't have a problem with it. But I'm wondering, is what you're talking about what we're talking about, or are you being metaphorical?
It is. No. I'm being completely serious because of the fact that I feel like how we do anything is how we do everything, and so in a grand scale, like the macro follows the micro to some extent, right? And so when we're talking about boundaries, right? The reason why I bring up being a dog dad and the reason why I bring up humans, because I'm not going to say that I know. I haven't had kids yet. I don't know if I would choose to spank them or not. But I know, what I do know is that when dogs, like a mother, has her puppies, she'll snarl, she'll nip at them, she'll like bite the back of their necks, she'll like dominate them and be like, yo, cut it out, right? There's a certain level of instilling boundaries, and it's not her being mean, it's her saying, hey, cut this out so we can have a good relationship and I can love you to the fullest extent. Now you know your reality, you know where I'm at, so you don't intervene on my sovereignty, and now we can just have a great relationship. And one of the things that I see with a lot of human beings is that kids are starting off tantruming at a very young age without any instilling of boundaries, and the parents just let them cry. And now we're seeing all these people who are homeless and or drug addicts and or just people just out in the world in general, emotionally unregulated, not having boundaries, whether that be through law and institution and or through just social, constructs of normalcy where you're able to just throw a tantrum. And we're not only like normalizing it, but accepting it to a space where we're so afraid to be mean or hurt people's feelings that, in my opinion, we're actually negating a very, very real aspect of love, which is love in boundaries. And if boundaries are not instilled, then there is no full relation to the reality that we are within. And then we also do not understand the confine, like the finite capacity of love and how to receive that in a healthy way. And so that's at least how I see it at like a high level standpoint. Now, is the solution to spank our kids? I'm not necessarily saying that. However, I have been in situations with like family, my own family, of my other kids in my family, where they're acting out, their parents aren't saying anything, grandparents aren't saying anything. I'm like, yo, what the fuck? This kid needs to not just be belittled or, I don't know, like these weird ways of trying to corral them in. Like he needs to have like a finite, like, hey, this is not okay. Stop right now. And when I did that, and I was like afraid to cross my boundary or like cross my allowance of just being his like, uncle or whatever. When I did it, he glowed. It was like, oh wow. Like it made him light up and that's me being mean or whatever. No, that's me just out of love being like, hey, yo, that's not okay. That's not how we act here. Yeah. Okay. Come into the tribe, come into the group, right? Of people who love you, but want you to be with us here. And how often does that not happen and then lead to the proliferation of, oh, you're trying to control me, or like no boundaries, blah, blah. And how does that lead to our massive homelessness where there's not only is there no necessarily.
So you're kind of implying that you see a direct relationship between that and the rise of homelessness.
Is it a direct relationship, or is it just the macro micro? Like, is it kind of like a semblance, or like maybe it is direct? I don't know. There's no way for me to quantify that data. At the same time, I do understand that if we're doing that in policy, it would also make sense that we're also not choosing to have appropriate boundaries when it comes to, for instance, like where we're fucking living, people looting, and now we have a different word for that because it's fucking racist, but we're okay with people smash and grabbing. And so if you try to stop someone from stealing from a store, now you're the perpetrator, not the actual perpetrator at hand. Like we're literally creating the victim, or we're creating the perpetrator to be the victim and the victims to be the perpetrator. It's Gotham, it's mayhem, it's absolute insanity. And yet how is that us not being able to fully embrace what it means to instill boundaries in a healthy way and to also correlate them with love? Because how can someone ever fully understand and accept their reality if they don't really understand the confines of what it means to be a human and operate? Consequences. Right? We can't save everyone also.
Yeah, I mean, I have more curiosity on a personal level of why that happens than not. One of the first things I learned, though, in undergrad, I did my first undergrad hours at a Boys and Girls Club, and I remember the director caught me not being too nice to children, and he's like, "Dude, they need boundaries. You'll make them happy if you tell them you can't do this."
Fascinating. That's it. Yeah.
And I tried it with them. I was like, yeah, they did feel a sense of release, and they felt a sense of just, all right, I'm not going to go crazy now because I know what lines there are. For
and that
me
you
not
also
to
care.
Cross. That I do care. Exactly. So there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. How it directly or indirectly ties into the flavor of our times. There's a parallel. I'm sure there's parallels there, right? But
well, if those are the parents and those adults are also voting to instill the legislation and it's paralleling, then how can it not be parallel? I don't know. That's at least my conjecture, I guess.
So what is the solution to all this chaos? I mean, it seems like, like I don't know what the answers are. And what else can I say that like the likes of like Rogan and his guests are not saying, right? I mean, like for
I'm not
all the
even
times I barely listen to him anymore. Not to say I don't want to. I love him, but but talking about how Frisco's gone to shit because of homelessness and how crazy LA is, it's like an exhausting thing for me. And it's like, all right, so what is the answer? Are we headed on an inevitable train of doom? That's bound to like just fall and collapse.
I don't think so.
So yeah, like, and why not? Why do you not think so?
Because I think that we have to have our room get really messy before we clean it up.
Interesting.
Like for instance, this
doesn't mean to surrender, right? But
no, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, what was the Leah Thomas, transgender swimmer who won was it the Olympic race or whatever it was? So there was a transgender woman who won the Olympic race, and now, after all of that being said and done, they're not going to allow that anymore. When it happened, they were like, yeah, that dude fucking crushed the top girl who's like been doing this for fucking years, who's been top for years, destroyed her. And they're like, oh, there's no difference, blah, blah, blah. And now they're stating that we're not going to do that anymore, right? Like that's a clear sign of like, hey, we tested the boundaries. Oh, okay, this isn't working. Like LA is getting to be like Gotham. How long can it be like Gotham? How many people can be stabbed or killed or all these things happen before people? I mean, once again, the reason why I don't necessarily like when you asked, am I fearful or worry? Like, yes, there's the capacity and the urgency that is caused by the potential fear or worry. But the reason why I don't choose to fear or worry or be caught up in that is because I feel like it's a natural progression of things in order for the human conscious or the consciousness of humanity to evolve. Because it's almost like without feeling the fire and being like, oh shit, it's hot. Like we have to feel that fire. We have to be like, oh fuck. I mean, and realistically, what you're talking about, exhausting those ideologies, like recognizing that ideal isn't always real. Like it's almost like we have to prove that concept. And I feel like we're proving that right now through these loss or lack of boundaries, right? So solution, I don't know what the necessary solution is. I just feel like it's working itself out. And I don't feel like we have to compare our podcast or try to make a solution or try to make it be something that anyone said before. And one thing that I will say too, and invite you just to as a reflection of you, is that there are people who would never ever listen. And when I say listen, I mean truly receive what one of Rogan's guests or what Rogan's saying, that would receive that from you. So just because something's been said before doesn't mean it'll be received. Yeah. And you might be the perfect vessel for it to be received. Yeah. So just
thank you for that. Yeah. My thing is for me.
Got you.
It's like, right?
Got you.
I'm here really for me to have an experience, you know, and to hopefully let go of what the expectations of me will be. It's a selfish thing, I guess, like I said, but
thanks for owning that, because that's awesome.
You know? Yeah. That's what it is. And what maybe that better that you're talking about, like things have to get worse before better. I mean, I don't know what that better is. And maybe things will never go back to what they once were.
Yeah, who knows?
And if better is being measured by how things once were, then we're headed towards a fantasy reality that could create more and more pain and suffering for someone who's hopeful. So then what does that leave us? To be like, okay, so if what once was is never going to be again, possibly, and I want to hope for the best, then how do I go about that? And what does acceptance look like? The darkness that we're experiencing in Gotham. And is this truly Gotham to begin with? It's Gotham maybe according to our standards of how things once were. You know, and people are going to hate me for this. They're like, oh, you know, but fuck it. I'm thinking out loud here, dude.
Yeah,
but
please.
What I'm really tired of is just people bitching and moaning about LA, including my own self sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the reality. To me, that's Gotham. And I'm sick of that, man. And I'm tired of that. And I cut off a lot of like consciousness types of followings that I had.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm tired of all of that. It's like, all right, fucking, like what else is there? Like some nuanced conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It's like, are we at a war constantly with the opposing views and opposing thoughts? And I'm trying to discover that what does being at peace and acceptance while also being in my warrior at the same damn time looks like.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody has the answers, man.
I mean, you do, and you will for yourself.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah,
and to do that is to know that I have a choice, and to do that is for me to step outside of my victimhood, because I can't really do much about the others.
No, I mean, and I agree. You truly can't. And for one, I'd like to say thank you for talking to me about it, even though it's been exhausting to some extent, because these are for you, because of these topics, like you just mentioned. But,
well, no. If we were to go back to the old, maybe it would have been exhausting. This is, I love this, man.
Okay, cool.
I am grateful for this. Yeah.
I am too.
Yeah.
And with that, I'd say I think that's a relative and a parallel challenge for me as well, especially when it comes to this type of stuff. Like, I mean, it's new to me in the sense of like talking about these things that could be, I don't know, really cancel culture-esque, things that could, I don't know.
It's I don't know, man. It's scary to do that these days. It is. It could come at a cost.
It could come at a cost. And I'm family first. Yeah. And my whole thing of battling and tussling with all this stuff for so long was like, hey, I just want to make sure that I don't, dishonor my family's name. I want to make sure they're good. Yeah. I want to do right by them first and foremost. And my family's also forward as well. You know what I mean? So how can I be purposeful in honoring my family that's coming forward as well? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so this is a part of that. And so there's like a fine line that I'm walking there while also being that warrior and also trying to find peace within it. And also being somewhat, I don't want to say messenger, but more so just like holding the space to speak about these topics and just ultimately be that like reminder of like, hey, this is the choice that we have. And everything else that goes along with that, all the reframes, all the things, all the modeling and all this stuff that won't just come from me, that will be a co-creation. But
yeah, that's right.
And we were talking about it earlier, as you are a psychotherapist, and just talking about therapy as a whole. Like, and we were talking about modeling being a solution and all these things, but like therapy is also a big solution to these things. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, well, I said, I mean, I'm sure you'll delete anything that you don't want to be said on the show, but like I said, like I'm proud of you for actually stepping in the therapeutic space where a lot of men that do the types of work that you do, generally they want to be like, therapy is played out, or it's constantly repeating a victim story or a problem story. That's how they view it. Yeah. And it seems to be like plant medicine or even the coaching realm. Like it seems to be a much more popular, a sexier thing.
Yeah, that's the sexy thing.
Right.
That's the thing to do. Yeah.
And it was, I don't know, like it hit me in a soft spot, and I was like, yeah. So
thanks, bro.
Yeah. What may I ask? Like, what made you kind of want to step into a therapeutic space and to ignore all the other noise that tells you like, nah, therapy is not for you. You're a sacred son.
For one, totally not going to delete this or anything, unless it's like a big long pause or something that we stepped away or something. Like, no, unless you want me to delete something, I won't delete anything. Thanks for asking that, and I love that it hit you there, because I've been being very proactive about telling other bros about it, and yet I met with somewhat of that same resistance, and there's all sorts of reasons for that resistance. But one of the ways that, well, for one, let me first answer your question. The reason why I chose to get therapy was because I needed to talk through my relationship with someone. There were so many reasons to stay, and there were so many reasons to leave. And being someone who has been in this relationship was in this relationship for 10 years and kept finding reasons to stay when it was like obviously at such a detriment to everything that I was building. Like this wouldn't be happening if I was still in it. Like Just down pat. There's too much of me having to deal with the drama and unregulated emotions and all sorts of stuff. It was just like all my energy was going there, right? That being said, I needed to figure out like, hey, bro, I got this guy, therapist at that point. And I was like, let me just give you the lay of the land.
You chose a man.
I chose a man for this specifically. And after, so he helped me walk through it and really just learned about the whole scenario and was able to be like, yeah, bro, these are the reasons, this is what's happening. And one of the big things that he illuminated for me, and this is, once again, you were talking about medicine work. I was in the medicine, space for, I don't want to say decades, but I was in it for years, like half a decade, and heavy cosmonaut and deep into the conscious, transformational festival community. Like that was where I met my past partner. And that was life for a long time until I came out of it. I was basically a hippie in my 20s. My whole point was to say like, yeah, I did all this medicine work and all these things and blah, blah. And I was like, oh, I'm able to rationalize and understand and analyze this relationship pretty thoroughly. However, there was one thing he said that was pivotal that made me just realize, oh shit. Okay, thanks for putting that in perspective to a point where that makes it easy for me to create this boundary. And I always knew that me being in that space with her, I was like, okay, I'm not the one to save her. No matter what I do, no matter how I try to show up for her, she chooses self-sabotaging behaviors. This isn't working out. It's making me depressed. It's making her be depressed. It's not working. One of the things he told me was that as long as I'm there, I'm creating someone, I'm basically blocking her mirror. Right? She could always step out of the way and kind of align the mirror and look at her mirror herself. But she's choosing to be right here and I'm in the way of the mirror. But if I'm not there, she has no one to block the way of the mirror. And she has to look at it.
Yeah.
And so if you love her, you'll, for one, step away for yourself to love yourself. And you'll also step away so that she can have her growth because she's not choosing it as long as you're there. I'm like, bro, thank you. Fuck, that's it. Because I felt it in that inkling of like, oh, I'm not the one, or no matter what I do, I need to leave so that she can be better, blah, blah, blah. But that was like, oh, bro, that's exactly what it is. Because I would just get projected on. I just get projected on. All the time.
And you took it like a champ.
Well, I'm not going to, I won't toot my own horn. I won't say that I didn't get to the space of being emotionally unregulated and mirroring her in those ways when it would just come to the point where I just got so fed up with it. So I won't say that I always took it like a champ. It got gnarly sometimes. That being said, that's why I got therapy. And that was able to help me recognize that the innate feeling and need to create that boundary was appropriate. And so after I did create that boundary, it's been useful for me to maintain it, as well as also to have maintenance just in all regards, whether that be family stuff going on, business stuff going on, having to, just deal with being single again and all these things that come up. And I've since changed therapists. I have a female therapist now that's been very helpful. And one of the things that I was saying to you earlier about my buddy was that like my buddy, would chronically not talk to me, even though he wanted to talk every week. At a certain time I'd call him, he wouldn't pick up. Well, he's going through a lot. And he'd say like, hey, I'm sorry, bro. I'm sorry I didn't pick up. I'm sorry I'm not calling you back. I love you. You're one of my best friends. And I'm like, it's okay. You're the type of bro that if you call me and you're like, hey, bro, I'm coming there right now. I need a place to stay. I'm like, bro, say less, right? And when someone has so much, at least this is for me, and I know that he's the same because we're very much similar people, your cup is so full that you're literally spilling everywhere and you're just so fucking upset or overwhelmed that the cup's shaking everywhere and you're like, I don't want to spill all this fucking, wine all over my friend's white shirt. I love him. I know he'd be like, it's okay, but I don't want to do that to him. So that's what therapy's for. You don't want to do that to your wife too. You don't want to do that to your spouse or to your kids, right? So the responsible thing to do is to have someone that can like have the receptacle. And that's what therapy's been for me. And that's why I told him to do it. I'm like, hey bro, I love you. It's all good. But fuck you, go BetterHelp. Here's the link. Do this and love yourself and honor yourself in this way so that you can show up better for your family. And so that you can call me and actually just have your cup at least halfway emptied and be like, yo, what's up, bro? How you doing?
Yeah.
And not feel like you're going to spill all your stuff all over me.
Yeah. And you believe that that was your friend's issue with not reaching out or not connecting. You felt like he's going to be too much. He felt that he's going to be too much for you.
Yeah, because that's always my thing. And we're so similar.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. Whenever I'm in a place of supreme distress, I do not reach out to people because it's so much that I'm like, what? If I call you, I want to be like, what's up, bro? How are you? I want to, I don't want to be like, bro, can you hold space? Fuck, I'm going through, talk me through all my shit. Would you do it? Sure. Could it potentially, once again, boundaries, right? It's not like friends can't be there for you. Like if you have a heartbreak or something. Like,
now,
okay,
people that are generally like that, they are the opposite of that, which means that they're almost holding too much space for others.
Yeah.
Was that like one of your situations?
100%. I hold space for my family.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I hold space for.
So did that get you to attract a lot of friends that you were finding yourself often holding more space than you should, or there was an imbalance in friendships? Because I had found myself in those situations, so I'm wondering about your experience.
Definitely. My father's story and or theme is consistently, like throughout my childhood, always just being overly generous, and that's been the archetype that I've had to break. And also the archetype of not being able to receive. That's also been a whole thing. And with that, like that generosity is a sense of holding space. So that can be holding space. That could be giving away free work. That could be not receiving things and doing things for free. All those types of things. Yeah. Which is, once again, love and boundaries, right? Like, is that loving?
Did you let go of a lot of friendships because of that? Or
100%.
And some you kept and you had to have a new conversation with them?
Yeah, some, but a lot of them
Did they get it?
Didn't.
The ones that stayed that you kept around, that you asked for, something needs to change?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And they were able to apply that?
Yeah. Yeah. And the ones that aren't worth that conversation, like I just not going to have that conversation.
Or you think they'll never get it, or you just meet them on certain circumstances.
Yeah, I think that once you become, I don't know, this might just be my intuition. Everyone's technology is different, but at least for me, I'm able to kind of recognize how a person might potentially be able to handle a reflection of themselves. Like there's certain individuals where, like for instance, for you, I have no fear at all of me being able to tell you, hey, you could say something happened. I'd be like, hey, bro, that's kind of on you though a little bit, right? Like you recognize how you could take accountability for that. I would have no fear at all of telling you that and you being able to be like, I don't know if I agree, but thank you for saying that. Let me think about that for a second. There's some people who I know who are good friends of mine who I know can't handle that shit.
What would they say?
I don't know what they'd say, but they wouldn't be cool about it.
Improv, baby.
They'd be like, I don't even, they'd be upset. I think that the first thing would to be like,
make it fun. Say something good.
Fuck.
Come on.
What the fuck would they say? Nah, bro, it's like, you don't understand. Like this person did this person did that, blah, blah.
That's the best case scenario.
That's the best case scenario.
Sometimes then they get combative too.
Yeah, exactly. Which I've never gotten there because I'm that, I know enough not to go there. And I'm just like, okay, I know how deep I can go with you. And that allows for me to also know, once again, like, would that be a person that I can empty my cup with? Right. Because if I can't even be truthful with them.
And like, bless their hearts, sometimes it's just they won't get it no matter how hard you try.
Yeah.
And then every now and then some will surprise you.
That's true.
And then also for me, it's also been a journey of learning that, okay, the ones that I do want to keep, and they may never actually have that capability that I want them to have.
Yeah.
But to accept them for that part of themselves that is giving in their own way. Yeah. And to appreciate that for that. But only we know what's the perfect level of what do I need and what I don't need. And it's hard sometimes, right? But sometimes then I don't want to get caught into having this over expectations while learning how to receive. Yeah. And that's a dance.
It is.
Yeah. Shout out to you for BetterHelp. Are they a sponsor of the show?
They're not, but I've already shouted them out a bunch of times and I'm like, if it ends up happening,
so it's a lot cheaper than regular therapy?
Honestly, I don't know.
That sounds like an ad right now.
Yeah. I mean, it might be. I think it's like $200 a month for like 4 45-minute sessions or something like that.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
That's pretty good considering that. And they're pretty decent.
Zoom.
They're good therapists.
I mean, I've only had 2.
And you stuck with them.
Yeah, I mean, one of them was chronically late, and so I was like, "This is out of integrity. I can't do this anymore." Like severely late, and I was like, he would give me extra time, but I'm like, "Bro, this is not. This doesn't
align." What does severely late mean?
Like 30 minutes to a 45-minute thing.
Therapist.
But shout out to Tom. He helped me a lot.
It says something to your ability to also. Like you probably came in such a place of openness and receptivity that you're like, even though he may not be, because you have the privilege of being around some powerful facilitators.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the guys that run Sacred Sun are masterful.
Yeah.
You know, but to not come in with that expectation of a space wanting to be held for you and to be like, all right, just give me whatever you got. That, I think it takes talent to do that, man. It's not an easy thing because you could have projected expectations on them.
Well, that would have been very foolish of me.
Maybe, bro. Yeah. But also, I got to say, this work is, to me, it's open heart surgery. To me, and you sit in my space, I have to kind of connect to it being a mother's womb where I am responsible for helping someone give birth.
Yeah.
And it requires major gentleness, a lot of heart, a lot of integrity. Where am I energetically as I'm sitting in front of this person?
Agreed.
I think it's very sensitive work, and it's more than conversations. You know, I believe that these conversations are generating experiences, especially if you have a shamanic background where you're calling in different types of energies. You can call it spirits or whatever, but it gets real. And you had a knowledge of all of those, but you're like, still, I'm just sitting here and having a conversation. And whatever this person's lack is, that's fine. Yeah. I'll stick to what's good for me. Yeah.
And
does that make sense?
100%. And I will say another thing that I'd say that I think more that aligns with whether it's, I think that the level of psychotherapy that you do is much more professional, much more refined than what you would necessarily get from BetterHelp. BetterHelp has actual licensed therapists, and it also has social workers, but it doesn't it's different than potentially like what you're doing. And at the same time, there's a certain level of tracking for both. There's a certain level of like observing and witnessing and holding space and having this unbiased space. And there's also a certain level of allowing for the individual to be able to work their own thing out. Like just even being able to speak about the thing to an individual where you're not going to be judged, and it's not going to reflect back into your friend circle. It's not going to reflect back into your romantic partnership. All these things
people
are very
need
helpful.
to hear what you're saying right now, because a lot of people are too afraid of stepping into therapist's space because they feel like the therapist is not going to care. Yeah. Or it's not good enough and they don't do that work. Yeah. Or you're saying like they don't have to be perfect, man. No. You know, there is room for them to be kind of flawed and not great, but still get something out of it. Yeah. You know, but also some level of integrity and gentleness also really matters. 100%. But if they're not being harmful, just kind of, you can take a lot out of it.
You absolutely can.
No matter what their talent is.
Yeah. When I think if the individual's coming in expecting them to heal them instead of allowing for themselves to find their own path in their healing, that's also just like a destructive pathway as well. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Yeah, that's a path. That's a doom pathway from the start, you know? It's like no one's going to provide it for you, right?
Nice. Yeah. Where do we go from here?
Well, one thing that I wanted to say in regards to this therapy space, because we talked about Sacred Sons and we talked about like, well, good on you after, knowing Sacred Sons, stuff like that. I think for men, it's very important to be able to have a somewhat of a fellowship or brotherhood that's allowing for them to experience grief. And let me rephrase this. I think that it's important for all individuals to be able to experience the depths of grief, whether that's through a fellowship, whether that's through a women's group, men's group, co-ed group, whatever the fuck it is. But one of the besides besides triumph over tragedy, choosing to be sovereign and not be the victim of your own story, the other part of my curriculum, whatever the fuck you call it, another part of the stuff that is really important to me is the understanding of grief and how that directly correlates with gratitude and humility, and then also allows for the proliferation of all the good things that we're necessarily missing right now because of the lack of depth in grief, which provides the lack of depth of gratitude and humility, consequently. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It reminds me of a client I was working with that was dealing with a father that he or she lost, and the conversation was heading towards a place of like, in order to really honor and love that person that you missed, you have to feel the full extent of your pain.
yeah,
You know, and that person felt some guilt and was like, yeah, feel that guilt, feel that pain. And then when you remove that, then you can actually go deeper into a place of loving, appreciating, and remembering that person.
yeah,
It really goes hand in hand together.
yeah, yeah.
And that's what you're touching on.
Yeah, and you as a therapist, I'm curious to hear, you know, when I talk about it, I talk about the gratitude being a well, right? And in order to access that well, we have to be able to. It's almost like having like the grief is the weight that allows us to dive deep into the well and access it, right? And I feel like for so much of humanity, just like you said, there's this disassociation with pain, and that being correlated with benefit and or favor. Like it's just something like, oh, pain, run away. You know what I mean? And there's also there's also we are losing and or perpetuating the lostness of, or the lack of pain and hard work or whatever with value and merit and all these things. And so when it comes to pain, it's like, oh, run as far away from it. Just go to the good stuff. Just go to the whatever is like the feel good, you know, thing right there. And in that, if we're like barely tapping into or not really tapping into grief at all, which grief doesn't always have to be like sobbing or like a loss. It could be like, oh shit, like everything is finite. Like, wow, this day is coming to a close. Oh, wow. Like, you know, I'm not going to get to see my great grandchildren and know the legacy that I have. Like, oh, there's infinite reasons for gratitude, just like there's infinite reasons for grief. Right. And they're intertwined in that way. Yeah. But the fact that we don't necessarily have those online all the time, I feel like, and the fact that we also just barely taste them, like when we have gratitude and it's like, oh, I'm super grateful right now because I'm feeling really good in my body and the sun is out and this and that, is like, is that gratitude, or is that gratitude connected to the fullness of grief, or is there like a deeper layer? Is there a layer that maybe our ancestors were connected to that's a technology that we've forgotten, that we hear it in our music? Like I would say that you know, Iranian music, like Middle Eastern music, Native American music, they all kind of have these morose type of tones to them, which I feel like is attached to that technology of grief that allows for us to be rooted in the beauty and love of art, and also be able to be attached to the humility of like the finite beauty of this whole thing, that allows us to be grounded and humble and attached to that gratitude.
And specifically like to Persian instruments or Middle Eastern instruments, oftentimes it seems like the instruments of that region, when they're being played, sounds like they're crying.
Right?
Yeah. And what are they crying about usually? And it's a sense of longing.
Yeah.
It's a sense of like, I'm looking for you. Where are you, my lover? You know, it is crying. It is shedding tears, but it is a sweet pain.
Right.
And
it's like a pain worth living for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, and to balance that off, there's a thing I heard Seinfeld say once, and he was like, pain is a rush of knowledge pouring into the areas that we need the most in order to learn. So generally, the bigger the pain, the bigger the lesson. Yeah. And we got to learn how to change our relationship with pain. So with my more seasoned clients, when they're stepping into our space, it's like, they're kind of like, they come in and there's almost like this awareness that's like, it's like, Yaya, I got a banger for you today. You know, it's almost like we learn, it's like we're going to have fun with it, but we're going to be in it and we're going to cry, or we're gonna, be
Yeah.
upset, and we're gonna be mad, and we're gonna be confused. But there's a part of me that knows that this is what I need in order to get to where I want to get to. And once we see life in that manner, then we realize that everything is here to really serve us. Everything is here to help us evolve.
Yeah.
And oftentimes pain could be a great way of getting there, although not always necessary.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Right.
Yeah. And I was talking to this about to my coach today, and it came up in the last podcast, and I'm literally witnessing myself in it, right? As you're saying, basically like opportunity begets tragedy, and like, so forth. There's this tragedy could befall us. We could become a victim circumstance, right? And then that could ultimately lead to this thing that is like, wow, the thing that we're just like, oh, I'm so grateful for. Oh, it all made it worth it, blah, blah, blah. And yet, potentially this thing that happened over here might have always happened regardless of like, this arc that's happening right here, right? Like this ended up inevitably coming to here and we've always worked itself out. Yet during this journey, this time over this arc, were we worrying? Were we like, oh man, everything sucks. Like, oh, it's not happening yet. Oh, it's not happening fast enough, blah, blah. And I find myself caught up in that. And I was talking to my coach about that today, and I'm like, I literally talked about this last time, and I find myself being that fucking character. I feel myself creating that reality where it's like, this is the thing. The journey right now is the thing. It's not, the happiness doesn't arrive here, right? The happiness doesn't arrive at the end. It can, but why? Why not be joyous and grateful throughout the whole thing, right? And how much of that is taught? I don't know. I can't quantify that, but what I can say is that I'm witnessing myself literally doing the dumb thing, which is the choosing to be ungrateful and choosing to be upset about it not going fast enough or this or that or whatever, and being in the midst of the journey because I'm not at the destination yet. And and recognizing how foolish it is, and yet still actually like being caught up in the fucking thing. But yeah.
Sometimes we got to be a baby.
Yeah.
That's the only way.
And we can know what to do, and yet doing it is a whole nother thing. Yeah.
And to connect that to probably a victim story, it's like, hey, maybe sometimes in the little pockets of time, it could help us to feel the grief through the bridge of victimhood. I guess it just becomes alarming when it becomes too many stories that have that same flavor. Yeah.
Well, I think it's very different and interesting, and another concept that would be more beneficial to be elaborated through an animation or something. But I think it's definitely different and interesting when you're choosing that story while also realizing you're choosing that story, which is meta as fuck. But truly, I mean, it'd be a whole nother thing if we're like unconsciously choosing it or subconscious, whatever it is, as opposed to consciously knowing like, oh shit, I'm doing this.
And
you know
what I've noticed with the people that stick with the work is that ultimately they get to that place no matter how strong of a victim they felt. And a part of them feels like a victim of being a victim, and it's like, fuck, what's wrong? And it's like, I've heard versions of saying, you know what? I don't want to forgive. I want to have this hate inside of me. And then they're like, well, why do I want to be hateful? It's like, fuck, how do I do so, then they start catching that. So people eventually, if they just stay committed to their journey, I've noticed that they get to the other side. They get to the other side.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when the newly enlightened spiritual being is just like, I need to have no ego. I need to have no ego, and they become so egoic about having no ego. It's similar to like.
That's it.
It's a similar thing.
It seems like that's nature's way of humbling us.
Yeah.
And it's like you're never ever fully there.
I would say I completely agree. And I think the thing that cuts the veil for me, because like I love how even earlier you called me out. You're like, so are you somewhat being a victim about the fact that everyone's being a victim, which is also meta in itself, but or sort of, I think. But the thing that just cuts the veil for me at the end of the day is that like, once again, those objective truths, love, oneness, all these things, like choice being one of the objective truths, like. And the thing is, for me, that whole concept brings forth so much reverence for another being when the human part of me can see someone and be like, oh, this person looks like this, person I've seen before who treated me bad and that I do not like, or I have these judgments for, or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And then there's the conscious aspect that's like, I don't know this person. I don't know their spirit. I don't know their soul. And there's a certain level of reverence I can have for whatever story they're creating. And then all of a sudden that comes online.
Yeah.
And I think that that's available. And I don't necessarily know if my desire for that reality is necessarily egoic. It almost seems like it surpasses those types of concepts. I feel like it comes to just more of a space of like clarity or just like cleanliness. I don't know. It's almost like instead of the my fucking analogies, it's like all the items in your like cupboard and the spices or like the toothpaste in your cabinet or whatever, you like able to rip the masking tape off and know exactly what it is. It's like, oh, okay. I thought it was toothpaste. Yeah, okay, it's toothpaste. Okay, that's Bengay and not toothpaste. like, oh, okay, cool. Now we know what things are. Okay, cool. Now we can use them appropriately. Now we know what we're doing. Okay, now it's not like I'm guessing. Oh, is this toothpaste? I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm choosing. And yeah, so I love this challenge of like how much of is it me being a victim of, or how much what is that? But for whatever reason, for me, that strive towards that ascent or that next plateau of just really play, feels to me not in the realms of, it doesn't seem like something that is in the realm of like, oh, there's a statue of the man who made us remember that we're all fucking God, because that wouldn't make any fucking sense, right? Because it would just be like, oh, we're all baseline here. No one's above or below each other. We can create that game, but that's not what we're playing. You know what I mean? It's a weird thing.
Yeah. I do appreciate the time we spent trying to have a nuanced perspective on victimhood and somebody that sits in front of us and makes us feel like, oh, you're caught in a victim story. And yet for us to, like, what's our choice in that moment and labeling and defining that moment? One of them is, oh, you're a victim of circumstances. That seems to be one choice.
Yeah.
What's the other? Is that the best choice that we can make in that moment? I wonder. And to tell you, can you see yourself being a victim? Or is there another choice? And what would that mean? And if I was able to make a choice outside of that in terms of our collective growth. If you're coming to me and part of me can identify that you're speaking as a victim, but yet a lot of my energy is going to this other place of what I think you are. What is going to happen to the collective? What is going to happen to us? What is going to happen to that person's growth in that moment? I believe that our best bet at helping somebody who is stuck in a victim story is to actually not see them as a victim in any shape or form completely. And this doesn't mean to be like, well, nobody is a victim, but mean that you can hear them almost cry about their victimhood, but still you're not seeing them sounding like a victim. I'm very interested in where my heart and where my mind will take me in that moment when somebody's sitting in front of me.
Yeah.
And I know that if I can somehow believe in them as something more than a victim, chances are they will have the best chance of growing through this experience of me. And I think it's an invitation to the heart, my brother. That's what I think it is.
Yeah.
That's what I think it is. I really want to know how I can expand my heart when I'm sitting in the presence of somebody that's stuck in one narrative. Because I think that's going to be an opportunity for me to grow, if anything, at the very least. And hopefully that's going to be our best bet at going against the Gotham mindset.
Bro, I think that you've just provided us all for an opportunity for growth. Because what I will say, And I just want to can we just take a breath into that for a second? Because that was a good one. Let's just take a breath in. Thank you. What I will say is that through the reflection of me doing these and going over some of the other things that I've done with my coach in regards to public speaking stuff and everything like that, I've always been super passionate. I recognize how intense I am now when I go over these things and I see them again. And I also know you already know how fucking goofy I am. And I'm also I have the serious component, right? And when we're talking about effectiveness and we're talking about, straight up effectiveness. I won't even say efficiency, but just effectiveness, impact, right? What works? Because that's ultimately the most important. And one of the things that my coach has reflected to me is that there's a certain, for one, we've gone into the reasoning into why I've become articulate to the certain extent that I have because of the fact that no matter what I did when I was a child trying to get through to my parents or parent and or in my relationships, I was like, okay, I'm going to be as clear and concise as I can so that I'm not misunderstood and was still misunderstood. And that type of fear and or strategy went into also delivering message and or speaking in regards to these topics and or public speaking, right? Which I have no fear of doing, but I also get really intense and I get really, maybe I do fast speech, maybe I get, use as fancy diction as I can, some shit like that. And one of the things that's been reflected to me is that bro, we want to feel you. If you want to make impact, if you want to be effective, the most effective thing that you can be is to be able to connect with the audience, is to be personable. And I feel like when you're saying, that's really an invitation to come into the heart, I feel like even just doing these podcasts, as I'm revising these books and making this new book, there is so much. I feel like there's a reason why everything's happening now, because there's a lot that I'm learning through this. Because for me, talk about black and white. I don't know if you've seen the cover of my book. It's straight up black and white from 2019, Victim or Hero. You know what I mean? And I still love it. And I don't think I'm Goggins at all, because his stuff is funny to me because I totally burn out from going too hard. He's stay hard, And I'm that's good for people who are can't get off the couch. I'm the guy who needs to chill out and, go to sleep on time instead of fucking staying up all night or,
somebody
going
needs
to
to yell at you to relax.
Whoop. That's why I got this Whoop. Whoop, sponsor me. All that being said, you're allowing for me to reflect and more deepen into the aspect of how I can approach this theory, story, I don't know, whatever I call this thing that we're talking about, whatever it is, the way that I can approach it that is different. Because the way that I approach it is you're saying, and how you've stated that you do within your therapist appointments, is oh, tell me about what you did. Oh yeah, but in that moment right there, you chose to take accountability there, right? You chose to do that. And so you're empowering them within that thing. Whereas my brain goes, hey, if you don't see God at all, you won't see God at all, right? What were all the things that led up to you being in that circumstance? And from that, can you take accountability from that? What were the times in the past where bad things happened and then there was a positive thing that ended up happening in the end? And did it all allow for your growth? That's the way that I see things, which is definitely more masculine, definitely more callous. And I'm not going to say that it's not accurate and or beneficial, and that doesn't mean that there's not deepening and realms to learn,
100%,
realms to expand and grow. So thank you for that, because I am recognizing my blind spots through the reflection of individuals like you and my coach and others. And it's humbling and it's also exciting because yeah, we're always going to change, and this is why this is happening. The refinement, right? Consistently refining and consistently growing and creating new colors, creating
Well, I think you're
new songs.
like one of the things that you're doing extremely well is showing people what it looks like to be so open and receptive in real time. You know, it's obvious you have a strong point of view, and your show has a specific narrative that you want to hammer, and your books that support that as evidence. And yet, you know, you definitely showed so much flexibility with me, kind of like, I don't want to say challenge, because that wasn't my intention, but to stretch it and take it to a different place, that if there was any ounce of ego in you, you would have stepped into like maybe this competitive place with me. Or not only you didn't do that, but you're also saying, oh, how could I actually take from that maybe? And that's such a beautiful thing for people to be able to see. And I think that's the biggest service of all, in my opinion, just to show an open heart and receptivity to what we don't know. Because God knows how much information there is of how much we do know. I think people are feeling a bit oversaturated by that.
True.
And like one of my struggles in terms of not stepping into the social media space is, gosh, how do I talk to people without making it sound like I want to tell them what they need to do and what they shouldn't do? Because I think on some level that's going to create more suffering on my end. That's not where my consciousness is. I want to be able to invite people to what we don't know. And perhaps we can only ask questions from that place, but not to say 5 things to do this, 3 things to do that, right? It's like when we do that to people, on some level, we are pushing them in a certain way that's telling them like you don't have the answers.
Agreed. Yeah.
You know, and deep down, I know that you know this, that we all have, the answers are all inside of our heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so that savior is inside of the same person's heart that actually is complaining about something. And thank you for receiving me, and thank you for just loving me the way you do in this conversation, because I felt nothing but love and openness and just presence.
Thank you, bro. And I hope you felt admiration too, because I admire you and I appreciate your opinion. For one, I think that the ability to be able to, like I said, it's hard for me to have ego about these things. For one, because the fact that I know that my end goal is to kind of disrupt, I guess, the whole framework of the ego, in the sense that it's not, the ego will always be there, and yet there's also this other aspect, which is just like there's the base component on top of it that overlays the entire thing, which is the creator, you know, which is just like the sovereign creator, and just like respect for each sovereign creator. And that's like, okay, go do whatever the fuck you want, be the egoic person, whatever the fuck you want, right? But there's no like savior of the whole thing. There's no need for that. Like you said, the savior's within the self, right? And one of the things that I wanted to point out too, when you're saying that we have the answers within ourselves, I think regardless of whether the answers are wrong or not, like they don't even have to be right. Because the individual is going to make the choices that they make. But if they don't feel empowered to make the choices they are feeling called to make, will they ever get the growth that they're longing for? Even if they don't necessarily consciously know what's happening in the subconscious, there is like a knowing of how to weave that path in order to get to that final destination. You know what I mean? And so sometimes those choices aren't going to be the correct ones, and they might lead to tragedy, which would then beget opportunity, which leads them to the final thing. Right. And yeah. So yeah, all that to say that like I'm grateful to be able to have this bounce back, because it's exciting to me. Because the other thing that I wanted to say is that I've witnessed myself realize that I didn't know shit every, like, I don't know, 5 years or something like that. And I can only imagine how it will become in another 5 years or 10 years. And I don't know. And my biggest thing is being in integrity as much as I possibly can be. And one of the things that irks me is me speaking out on something and then finding out later, feeling cringe, like, oh, fuck, what the fuck was I saying? And so by all means, if there was something that you would be able to say that would make me just like flip my whole world upside down, I would welcome that gladly, because I want to be able to feel fully resonant with what I'm putting forth, especially when it's outside of just us and eternalizing a conversation and going forward with that, because I want to sit right with myself, and I want to honor myself and my family and my progeny. You know what I mean? That's paramount above all. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to us. We're only about 25 minutes away from each other, so
awesome.
I'm sure with time we're going to be able to help each other grow and mirror each other in beautiful ways. But I think this conversation was more than enough for us to do our best job at demonstrating what openness could potentially look like.
Agreed.
I certainly hope that people could take something out of it. I certainly did.
Oh yeah.
And I'm grateful for the opportunity, brother. Thank you.
I am too. Thank you so much for coming on, bro.
Love you, mate.
Love you too. Deeply honored. Yo, this has been the Magnanimous Collective with the one and only Yaya Gorbani. Did you want to shout out? I know the social media
That's an
things.
interesting name, Magnanimous. How long did you think about that name?
So Claim Your Epic was the original, which is what I made in 2019. And my book mentor and my coach was like, hey, I think we need to change it up. And magnanimous was always one of my favorite words since college. I was in an advanced oral presentation class, and I had to give a speech about someone. And magnanimous was a word I found, which means to be gracious and generous in the face of a rival or someone of lesser power.
Wow.
And there's more definitions to it as well. It's just like, it's literally the type of qualities that would allow for the individual to be at the stature are ones of like virtue and honor and just a certain level of regalness that doesn't come with authority, but it comes with divinity and just with like full trust and knowing that you're like, this certain level of reverence. So I wanted to be a collective of individuals that embody that.
I love that. I didn't even know that was the meaning of the word. I felt like it's a word that you made up, and I was like, that's a cool.
No, it's not. Yeah.
I was like, how seriously am I going to take this word as a real word, or is it his word? Either way, it sounds great.
Oh, dope.
So
well, yeah, I'm glad
awesome,
I could share that.
And it wasn't taken, huh?
No. Yeah. I mean, Magnanimous is based from, I think it's like a company.
But you don't have an IG page for it.
I do. Yeah, I just haven't put it out yet. It'll be out by the time this comes out.
Because I went to your following list to see if you have anything there, and there was no Magnanimous there.
Bro, I haven't even touched all that yet, because I have like 8 of these lined up, and there's more coming, and then I'm editing them all, and then we'll start to.
Are you going to be a perfectionist about it, or are you going to be able to just release it and let the ethers do what the ethers need to do?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, well, I'm going to have reels and shorts cut up of all of it, and then I'm editing it all myself because I know how to do it. Yeah. Use AI for part of it, and
that's exciting, man. Yeah. It's going to be great. I hope that you stay consistent with it, because I think you're going to be able to take it very far.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate
Love
you.
Love you. No social. People that are going to want to find me, they'll find me.
They will find you.
They do. Yeah, God's good in that way.
All right, love y'all. Till the next one.
Peace.